fellow assassins, to another episode of the Dark Assassins Podcast, the show that dives deep into not just technology, but the concepts, software, and procedures behind it all, and explains it so simply that even your grandma can understand it. As always, I'm your host, the Dark Assassin. So, software developers out there, and for anyone looking to get into software development, if the reason you're thinking about getting into software development is because you think you can get away from all of the math and all the physics out there, I got some bad news for you. I got some really bad news for you. You can't get away from it at all. It's gonna come back. So that's what we're going to get into in this episode. But first, I want to address something that I found quite hilarious this week. So on a few times on the podcast, I've brought up hilarious emails that I've gotten from, like, the automated emails that, companies will send out, right? So I got this fantastic automated email this week. Actually, not just one, but two of them. Two of the exact same email. Basically saying that in their opinion, the podcast isn't performing very well because it is hidden on YouTube. And anyone that actually knows anything about this podcast knows darn well that the reason it is, so, according to them, hidden on YouTube is because it is quite simply not on YouTube. So I know that might be mind-blowing to them listening, which actually I stand corrected. I know they're not listening, because if they were, they would actually know that this podcast is not on YouTube. Although, to their credit, I have debated putting the podcast on YouTube just as like an audio version on there. But at the same time, I've kind of said no to that, because then I guess I wouldn't technically have to, but I would kind of want to have all the episodes available on there. And some of the episodes we've done on the podcast, a la the WWDC coverage or any other kind of news-based coverage that we've done, is basically outdated by the time it would be up there on YouTube, so kind of defeats the purpose of those episodes. So it's something I've thought about, but never actually gotten around to do it. But yeah, this to the automated company that's definitely not listening that sent me the email. It is not hidden on YouTube like you think, because it is not there. So let's get into this week's trivia question. So this might be an easier trivia question if you're keeping in line with the... Well, actually, maybe it's not an easier trivia question, but it is keeping in line with the theme of math and physics merging with computer science and software development. So this week's trivia question is, who was the first programmer hired for the Apollo project who later became the director of the software development division? So who was that first programmer for the Apollo project who then became the director? So that is your trivia question for the week. So before we get into some cybersecurity stuff, I know Facebook has really gone downhill. I think that's putting it mildly. They have really just gone south quick. I remember back when I first got my Facebook account, it was I guess I was naive back then and never should have gotten it in the first place. But back then, it wasn't all just a bunch of ads and sponsored stuff and suggestions and all that stuff. And the thing is, in recent weeks, months, whatever, years maybe, I've noticed a rise in like things in my feed that I either don't follow or is just a straight up ad. And this week I decided to actually see how bad it was, which I didn't actually plan on doing this, but what happened was I opened the app, which, if you can't tell, that was my first mistake. I opened the app, and the first post I saw was a post from one of my friends posting an update, which is the only reason I go on there. And then the next thing was, I don't remember if it was a suggested post or a sponsored post, and so I just, scroll past it. The next post is the same thing, scroll past it. Next is the same thing, scroll past. And then I noticed that I've been scrolling for a little bit and have yet to see a post from a page that I follow or one of my friends on my friends list. And I was about to exit the app because I was like, oh, this is just garbage. I'm not gonna look at this. And then I thought, how deep does this rabbit hole go? How far will I have to scroll until I will actually find another post from either a friend or family member that's on my friends list or a page that I actually follow? And I kid you not, guys, I almost gave up on this challenge. That's how far I had to scroll. I kid you not, 80 suggested for you / sponsored posts later did I finally arrive at a post from another one of my friends, which was posted like a day ago, which I hadn't been on Facebook in over a day, so that should have been right at the top of my feed, but it wasn't. And then the post after that was another post from a family or friend or page I follow, I forget which. And then it was right back to the same old garbage of sponsored and suggested content. So yeah, like the thing that just, like, I knew Facebook was bad, and I had heard and I had seen from personal experience that a lot of it is just, stuff you don't even follow or just straight up ads. But I didn't realize just how bad it actually was until this week when I actually, ran the numbers and saw how bad it was. Now, I could understand having that many suggested posts and all that garbage, after you've been scrolling for a while and you've actually gotten through all of the updates from your friends and family members and pages you follow. But literally when you first open the app and there is literal proof 80 posts later that there is still new stuff that I haven't seen from friends that I actually follow, which is the only reason I still have this horrendous app and account. Like, there's obviously stuff I want to see, yet you fill it with so much garbage. There's a reason why I barely ever touch this terrible app in the first place. So now I get that the Zuck, our data be upon him, has to make his money somehow, right? But 80 posts? 80? I have to scroll through 80 things that I do not care about just to see the stuff that I actually care about before you then put me through another onslaught of things I don't care about, which is, seeing posts from friends and family members that I missed, which, as I've mentioned a few times now, is literally the only reason that I have for keeping this account on this terrible website or application or however you want to look at it. So, yeah, the only reason that I have an account on this cesspool of a site is to keep up with, family members and friends from like high school or, college that I don't really talk too much anymore, but I like to, still see what they're up to. And if you literally take away my ability to do that by only showing me sponsored and suggested content rather than content from the people that I actually want to see content from, it kind of takes away the entire point of having the app in the first place. So, yeah, I don't know. This might be the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back on this one. I'm not sure, but yeah, it was pretty horrendous. So any one of you that is unfortunate enough, like me, that still has a Facebook account, I kind of would be interested to know how, if you fall into this category, how many posts of just suggested or sponsored content you see before you actually will see another post of someone you're actually friends with or a page you actually follow. And I'm interested to see if any of you get to 80 or less than 80, get more than 80. I'd be really interested to hear that. So if you want to, you're more than welcome to shoot me an email at contact@darkassassinsinc.com with how many garbage posts you encountered on Facebook before you actually saw something that you wanted to see. Or if you just have, any comments or topics for future episodes, you can shoot me an email there too. The link's in the show notes below for that. But with that out of the way, let's get into our cybersecurity tip. So for this week's cybersecurity tip, I think it kind of goes without saying that you should be mindful of what cloud-enabled smart home devices you have in your house. Now, I have not made it... I guess I haven't been private about the fact that I'm not a particular fan of smart devices and cloud-enabled services and just the cloud in general. I've made it pretty clear about that fact, that I'm not a fan. And some people, might consider it, tinfoil hatty that, do you think the cloud, they can do whatever they want with your data and blah, blah, blah. But I guess it wasn't this week. I guess it was really in the news last week. I think was when it kind of first surfaced. Literally, Amazon decided to shut down this guy's smart home because of a false racism accusation made by an Amazon driver. Now, don't get me wrong, it shouldn't be taken lightly if there, is, a allegation of, racism and whatnot. But Amazon just literally shut down this guy's account for a false accusation. So I will have a link in the show notes that you can read at your leisure, but just to kind of go through it a little bit here. Basically, this entire incident is just another incident adding credence to the tinfoil hatters that have been saying that you shouldn't use cloud services because they can pull your data and pull your access and pull your service and whatever they want to do on a whim, basically, whenever they feel like it, which is true. So basically, as I mentioned, a Amazon driver falsely accused a resident of a racial slur when he was delivering a package to the residence, and then Amazon proceeded to lock this guy out of his Amazon account and logged him out of his Echo smart devices. So he was not able to, use any of his Echoes in his house to do smart home things because Amazon was kind enough to force log him out of his devices. Which, before we get any further, I mean, this is literally what we're talking about here. Like, this guy purchased hardware for his house, and then the company that owns said hardware literally made it impossible for him to use said hardware. Like, so much for you buy it and it's yours. You buy it and it's yours as long as you play by our rules, is basically what this is here. So neither the guy in question or any of his family was even home at the time. And then Amazon proceeded to get schooled when this guy, Brandon Jackson is his name, by the way, released, basically filed a complaint with Amazon, which, I mean, obviously, like, if I came home one day and I saw, I was locked out of my Amazon account, I'd be like, what the heck is going on? And I'd want some answers. So he proceeds to review the security footage caught by his video doorbell, and sent all that to Amazon, obviously. And literally all the footage showed was that there was no slur actually in there, and actually it was an auto-generated response from the smart doorbell saying, "Excuse me, can I help you?" Because, I mean, that makes sense. You ring the doorbell, automated response from the doorbell, makes sense. So also, according to Brandon Jackson, the footage showed the driver wearing headphones. So I would assume he was probably listening to something, which, I mean, I don't know how loud he would have been listening to said thing, but, if you have headphones in, I don't know. This whole story is just freaking wild. But, like, I mean, the thing of it is, right, like, on a false accusation, which, granted, like, even if it was a legit, accusation and this guy actually did, say a racial slur, like, the fact that Amazon has the power to just straight up remove your access to a device that you purchased, I mean, you can agree with their reasoning or not, but at the end of the day, I mean, if you have a cloud-enabled device like this, where the cloud provider, in this case Amazon, can shut off your access to it when or if they feel like it, you don't really own that device, which kind of also adds to the point that, well, I guess maybe not adds to the point, but it's kind of an open secret that these smart devices like the Amazon Echoes and the Google Homes and, all these smart devices with the smart assistants are basically just kind of funneling your data, all the voice commands and everything back to whoever their head company is. So now obviously I'm not going to just spout out a problem and not try to give any solutions, because there is a self-hosted option out there called Home Assistant, which basically allows you to have all the benefits of the smart home without any of the cloud features, if you will, in the sense that you can host everything yourself, everything's local, nothing leaves your home network. You actually can buy the products yourself and you own them, and you can make sure that there's no spooky stuff of your, smart device sending data out across the internet. None of that. Everything just stays contained locally on your home network, and you don't have to worry about this ever happening to you. So if you're interested in actually going the smart home route, I would highly recommend trying to look into Home Assistant and getting devices compatible with that, and keeping everything on its own separate VLAN, or basically making it accessible to you, but making sure that those devices don't actually have access to the internet. So getting back to the article here, According to Brandon Jackson, he said, despite promptly submitting video evidence immediately upon learning of the issue, that being his account being locked and unable to access his Echo devices, his account remained locked, and despite numerous calls and emails, he said his account wasn't reinstated until May 31st. Now, for some context here, his account was locked on May 25th, and he didn't get access back to his account until the 31st. So a decent amount of time to be locked out of his account. So according to him, which I think we can all agree with, it's you can't really blame Amazon for taking the issue seriously, the accusation seriously. But rather than a blanket shutdown of all the services, I feel they probably could have done a little more due diligence, rather than just immediately shutting his stuff off. And again, quoting from Jackson here, this incident has led me to question my relationship with Amazon. After nearly a decade of loyalty, I've been given a harsh reminder that a misunderstanding can lead to such dramatic measures. And I think that pretty much sums it up perfectly, that you could literally do nothing wrong, and these cloud companies that are hosting your smart devices could literally take all of that away from you on a whim because something that you didn't even do and because of a simple misunderstanding. So let this be a caution to all of you out there. If there's any of you out there in the smart home space have any smart home devices, something to keep in mind, that in reality, you really don't own said smart home devices, especially if the company that produced it has the ability to shut it off if and when they feel like it. So if you're looking into getting into the smart home space, or you're already in the smart home space, I'd highly recommend looking at the Home Assistant route. There's a ton of, I believe they have a ton of, there's a big community out there for Home Assistant, a lot of compatible device lists out there. So if you're interested, I would do some research into that. But yeah, that is your cybersecurity tip for the week. So another thing that I thought about this week was there used to be a time where we would say the computer is thinking. Now, if you're older, from back in the day, back in like the Windows, I'm thinking like Windows 95, 98 days, maybe even a little before that, maybe even a little after, like Windows XP, but more so the older variants like 98 and 95 or newer, or older rather. We, at least my family, we used to say that when the computer was taking a bit too long to load stuff, and you would hear that super loud mechanical hard drive clicking noise like this, we would say the computer is thinking. And that was the sound of the computer thinking. And nowadays, if the computer doesn't load something in like 5 milliseconds, you're like, oh, this thing's trash. Get this out of my sight. Or you're like, oh, this developer doesn't know how to code. They made a terrible app. Or, you make all these excuses that if things aren't like done instantly, it's pretty terrible. Which is kind of funny because, back in the day, we weren't spoiled with these fast speeds of, internet and SSDs and flash storage and flash drives and, all this speed and whatnot. Back in the day, like, you had your 500 and your 56K modem internet over dial-up and you were happy with it, right? Your computer took like 20 minutes to boot, and that was fast. It would take like 30 seconds to a minute to open an application, and you were happy with it, right? Like nowadays, any of that happens and you're like wanting to get rid of your computer as soon as possible. You're ready to throw that thing out the window and go get a new one, because the internet's too slow for you to actually buy a new one online. So you have to get in your car and drive somewhere. And even though that's actually longer, you still do it anyway because it feels quicker than having to wait those couple seconds for a web page to load. So I don't know why that came to me this week, but I just thought it was funny that, like, back in the day when computers were slow and you could hear the hard drives clicking, we thought they were thinking, and now we get mad when things take too long. Although now we think of computers thinking in a different way through, the whole AI machine learning stuff, which, as we've kind of talked about before, really isn't thinking. It's just a computer crunching some numbers and spitting out a result, which probabilistically, according to its math, is the correct answer, which, if you've ever actually played around with tools like ChatGPT, for example, can be completely wrong, yet seem so confident because, according to its math, it's correct. But obviously, its quote-unquote thinking, aka its math equation, was not perfect and gave an incorrect result. But with that little fun story out of the aside, let's get into what nerdy stuff have I been up to this week. So I'm not going to lie to you guys. I kind of took the week off from nerdy stuff. I pretty much opted to relax and play some video games. But even though I was playing video games, as I mentioned a while back on the podcast, when you're a software developer playing video games, it is you literally can't take a break, because your mind, at least mine, is thinking about how things are implemented in the code behind the scenes. Now, this week wasn't necessarily an instance of that as much as my optimization brain and thinking, how can I optimize things to the max, kind of kicked into high gear, and I tried to optimize how I played said video game. So, a little bit of context here. The game I was playing was Gran Turismo 5. Quality game, by the way. Even though it's on the PS3, which at this point is old. I think it came out in like 2007, which to me, when growing up, getting a new PS3, like, that thing was like, blazing fast hardware, amazing graphics, and it's old now, which makes me feel old. But anyway, Gran Turismo still looks, in my opinion, pretty darn good, especially on like a 4K TV. I don't even think the signal's being outputted in 4K, which I'm pretty sure it's not. I don't think the PS3 can handle that. But even still, it looks pretty darn good on a 4K TV. But anyway, I was trying to get the elusive Formula Gran Turismo, which is basically the F1 car, essentially. And you need it for a specific, like, race series in particular. And because the online feature shut down a while ago, the only way that you can get this car is if you get lucky enough to find it in the used car lot in the game. And the used car lot updates every quote-unquote in-game day, which is essentially whenever you see, like, the loading screen show up, like before a race, for example, or when you try to load a special event or something. So that's when you would get another new batch of 6 cars, and there'd be a total of 30 cars in the used lot. So every quote-unquote in-game day would add 6 new cars and remove the 6 oldest ones. Now, there's technically 2 other ways that you can get the Formula Gran Turismo in the game. The one is by a random car gift card thing that you get in the game. So like when you unlock like certain milestones, like you've driven a certain number of miles in the game, you'll get one of these gift card things which you can redeem for a random car. And then the other one is, I believe if you complete every single one of the endurance races, I believe you have a 1 in 3 chance to get the Formula Gran Turismo, the other 2 cars being one of the 2 Ferrari F1 cars. So you're never guaranteed to get it. So really your only reliable way to achieve this car is through the used lot. So the odds of finding one are pretty slim, and it really hurts when you see it come up and you don't have enough money for it, because you know that you're never going to see it again because it's just going to be gone. Which actually happened to me. I was playing and I saw it come up in the lot, and I was like, yeah, I don't have enough money, and I can't make enough money in the number of events that it'll take before it's gone. So this is big sad. But then I figured out there's got to be a faster way to get these cars to update and get new cars in the used lot. And sure enough, there is. So optimization to the rescue. So in this game, there are license tests that you can take. And basically, if you go into one of the licenses, it'll do the loading screen, and then you can skip to the next one without actually doing the license. It'll show another loading screen, and then you can skip to the next one and do that 5 times until you get to the 5th one, and then you exit out, go check the used lot, see if it's there, and repeat the process. So that was the fastest way that I found, rather than having to go in and do some random race that'll take like a few minutes to do, and then do that race 6 times, which would get very boring. Which, granted, going through the license thing was also very boring, and it took me multiple hours, but I did eventually find it once I actually had the money saved up. So I actually did manage to purchase it. Now, after I did purchase it, of course I had to give it a test drive, and immediately crashed and burned because I don't know how to drive this thing, because it is so fast, and the acceleration is insane, and the downforce is also insane, which means it corners super quick. So like you slightly turn the wheel and it's just gone one way or the other. So needless to say, I met the wall. I made pretty good friends with the wall. I'll say that we became pretty good buddies. But the real reason, of course, that I'm talking about this is because this was all just a ploy to build up to the fact that I'm going to make my own racing video game. And as you can tell by that silence there, that is a joke, for a few reasons. One, I am not skilled enough in either the graphics department or the physics department. For the graphics department, I've mentioned multiple times that I am terrible with graphics, and doing anything graphics related is like the bane of my computer science, software development, programming existence. And I also like being able to model and design like 3D models of cars and stuff. Yeah, no, that's way out of my wheelhouse. Now I can look at, models of cars and be like, that's a pretty good looking car, or no, that's not a very good looking car. But actually designing them myself, I would basically solely make, that is not a very good looking car. So it would not be a good game in that respect. And then the other aspect, I definitely am no physics expert, and I don't have a PhD or anything like that in physics, although I do know a guy. But yeah, so definitely not going to be able to make my own game. Now, why do I bring physics up? Because there's a lot of physics that actually goes on when you're thinking about a racing game, because there's a lot of things you have to take into consideration with the aerodynamics of the car, how the air flows over it. Is there, what kind of downforce it has, or the ability for the car to like stay, and handle and turn in corners without like sliding, the rear end kicking out, how much grip does it have? There's so much stuff that goes into how a car drives and performs that you have to have some strong foundations in physics to be able to understand this, to be able to then model that in code. And when I say model that in code, I'm not talking about like creating a 3D model or doing some systems engineering thing or anything like that. When I'm talking about like modeling it in the code, I'm saying like, okay, you give the car X, Y, and Z attributes, and then based on those attributes, that'll determine on, how fast you can corner without like the rear end starting to slip out on you, or what's the fastest speed that you can go down a straightaway, because obviously if you've ever driven a car before, you know that it doesn't accelerate infinitely. Like you can't go to light speed or beyond in a car. Like there's a limit to it. You can only go so fast. And similarly, like how quickly does it break? Like you have to take into account, the surface you're on. Is the track wet? What kind of tires do you have? How much does the car weigh? There's so much stuff that goes in to creating a good racing game that like you generally don't even think about, assuming it's done right. Now, obviously, if the game isn't done very well, it'd be pretty easy to pick up on like, whoa, I'm driving a Toyota Prius and I went from 0 to 60 in half a second. Anyone that knows Priuses know that's not going to happen. Or just literally any car in general is not able to do 0 to 60 in half a second, unless it has like some like rocket propulsion maybe. But even that, like, I don't know if you're not driving that car like in a race, that's for sure, unless it's like maybe a drag race. But on like an actual like road course type race or oval race, it ain't happening. But yeah, like, and then you also have to take into account like, if you add a spoiler to the car, or you change the tires on the car, or you reduce the weight of the car. I mean, there's so much stuff that goes into these calculations that it's not just like, okay, I make car go vroom, and if you hold certain key down, it goes faster, and if you hold this key, it turns left, and if you hold this key, it turns right, and if you press this key, it brakes. Like, there's a lot more to it than that, which I think this is a good jumping off point to, physics and math in computer science and software development. Because as I mentioned at the top of the episode, if you're trying to get into computer science and software development because you think you can get away from math and physics, you are sorely mistaken. Because there are, I mean, on the one hand, literally by nature of you coding, you are writing instructions for some type of silicon which uses transistors, which works by having electricity being shot through them, which the way that you can do all the calculations for that is done with math and physics. So you're already dealing with that stuff, number one. But number two, a lot of applications just in general have some kind of math component to them. Like, there's going to be instances when you're writing code where you're going to be having to do math. It doesn't matter what kind of project you're doing, but you're going to have to be doing some kind of math. Now, when it comes to other physics things that I actually have written, because obviously I'm not writing a racing video game, but some physics-related programs that I actually wrote was I wrote I called it like a time travel simulator, and obviously simulator is in heavy air quotes. It's up on my GitHub if you're interested. But it basically takes Einstein's time dilation equation to simulate you traveling through time. So basically what it does is you can give it two of the following three things. You can give it the time you want to spend traveling through time, how far in the future you want to go, or what % the speed of light you want to go at. And then based on which two of those you give it, it will calculate the third and then transport you through time, which kind of cool. You know, it was basically more of a conceptual proof of concept thing, because I found it kind of interesting to, you know, traveling through time. I mean, it's like science fiction, right? It's something that sounds really cool, but on the one hand, while time traveling is basically just in the realm of science fiction, based on Einstein's equations for time dilation, it's proven to be possible that you can travel through time, at least forwards in time, just by going fast, which is pretty cool. So I was like, okay, well, let's take this equation and write a program out of it. So that was fun. Another program I did was another basic physics problem, if you will, projectile motion. Specifically, the point of the program was if you're a pilot flying in like some bomber or something, you're trying to drop a bomb. Basically, you can give like your altitude and your speed and whatnot, and then it'll like tell you, you know, how far away from your target you should be before you drop the bomb. And of course, obviously, this is ignoring air resistance as you do, because since whenever us baby physics plebs do any kind of physics calculations, we always ignore air resistance, because anyone that's taken basic baby physics, aka high school physics, knows based on, you know, X, Y, and Z, ignoring air resistance, what is the speed? Or ignoring air, you always ignore air resistance, right? Because this is baby physics we're talking about. Now, if you're doing real physics, obviously you don't ignore air resistance, but I am not doing real physics here. I was doing baby physics because I am a baby, and I don't have a PhD in physics. So, also, going back to the racing game example, you kind of do have to take air resistance into that, because there's a concept in racing called drafting, and anyone that's also just generally driven on a highway behind a semi-truck or just any large vehicle in front of them knows there is a principle called drafting, which, even if you don't know it by name, is this idea where a larger car in front of you is basically breaking the wind in front of you, making you have less air resistance, and therefore you can travel faster and more efficiently. So in the racing world, it's beneficial because if you have less air resistance, one, you can save fuel. So if you're doing like an endurance race, that's important. But also because you have less air resistance, that means you can travel faster, which makes it a lot easier to overtake other cars. But going back to a more real-world example, if you're traveling on the highway and you're doing some kind of like road trip or something, if you just park yourself behind like a semi-truck, which I don't recommend, you always want to make sure you keep a good distance between you and cars in front of you so you don't have rear ends and collisions and that kind of stuff. But you will notice if you're drafting behind one of these semi-trucks, or with all the massive SUVs on the road today, if you're behind one of them, you'll notice that you don't really have to put your foot on the gas as much, because there's less air resistance because you're drafting behind them, and your fuel efficiency goes up. So there are definitely, air resistance definitely does play a significant role in the real world. And if you're doing any kind of real world simulation type stuff, whether that's racing or any kind of other real world physics stuff, you do need to take it into consideration. But of course, for the example of a baby physics application, you can ignore air resistance, or at least I did. It makes the calculation not accurate, but this is baby physics, so I think you can forgive me. At least I hope you can, because it's baby physics. But anyway, going back to some other real world scenarios, like if you're doing any kind of real world modeling and simulation type stuff, you're going to be dealing with physics and math, because it's all around us. And if you think about it, all of the modeling and simulation stuff that's run in the various physics labs to like simulate various things about like the universe or other planets or the solar system, or like anything that physicists want to model, I bet you can't guess how they model said things. They do it with software on massive supercomputers. So someone somewhere out there had to write the code for it, which means someone somewhere out there had to know the physics, or at least have a smart physics person tell them the physics, so that they could then implement it in their code to be able to accurately represent whatever they're trying to model or simulate. And even other things too, like the James Webb Space Telescope, JWST, rocket ships, the moon landing. I mean, all this stuff had software developers behind it writing the code in order to make these things function. And obviously, in the case of the rocket ships and the moon landing, that's obviously some rocket science going on there. So computer science does kind of get entangled with rocket science. So there is literally no escape from the math and physics if you are doing computer science or software development, unless you're just like doing super basic programs. But if you're ever trying to do anything like complex, or you're programming things in the real world, you're almost certainly going to be doing some kind of math somewhere, and there's a decent chance you'll probably also do a little bit of physics in there too, potentially. So anyone that tells you that how hard can software development be, it's not rocket science, in some cases it actually could be rocket science. Well, I mean, a for loop obviously isn't rocket science, but that for loop as part of a larger calculation in said rocket science is rocket science. So yeah, there's somewhere out there's got to be software developers that write the code to make these simulations and rocket ships and all that stuff happen, which means either they or someone they know had to have a lot of physics involvement in order to make that happen. So just when you thought that all software development was click-clacking away on the computer, there's a lot more to it than that. Hopefully this episode demonstrated. Now, speaking of physics, space, and all that good stuff, that is a great segue back into our trivia question for this week. So for this week's trivia question, who was the first programmer hired for the Apollo project who later became the director of the software development division? If you said Margaret Hamilton, congratulations, you got this week's trivia question correct. So congrats to all of you out there who got it right. And, this was actually kind of a fun episode for me. You know, I it was, in full disclosure, this was kind of one of those episodes where coming into recording for the episode, I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to talk about. And then just like literally like hour, like what's the word? You know, like right at the wire, right at the deadline, you know, the inspiration comes to me because I was thinking, you know, what the heck am I going to do for nerdy things? Because I really didn't do much this week. And then I got to thinking, I mean, I played video games, but that's boring. But wait, I did optimization in video games. That's kind of nerdy. And then wait a second, the game I was playing was racing. That has physics and software development. We can do this. So that was kind of interesting. That's little sneak peek for all of you that stayed to the end on the insights of how my crazy brain sometimes works. But that's going to do it for this episode. So if you enjoyed, I ask that you leave a rating and review and subscribe to the Dark Assassins podcast if you haven't done so already. Also, be sure to share with a friend or family member, maybe a physics friend of yours, perhaps. And if you have any questions about this episode, or if you have any comments for future episodes or topics, you can shoot me an email at contact@darkassassinsinc.com, link down in the show notes below. And that's going to do it for me in this episode of the Dark Assassins podcast. Until next time, my fellow assassins, remember, full nothing equals true. If action not equal to null, return true. I'll see you next time on the Dark Assassins podcast.